A video about self-defense and what it has to do with paintball guns, French flare guns that have been converted and repurposed as self-defense weapons, marbles, and slingshots, and bows and arrows. Without a doubt, most of you are aware of the fact that for centuries people used slingshots or slings, and especially bows and arrows, as lethal weapons. And in most countries, if you're not aware of it, these are not regulated. For the same reason you can't regulate a rock and somebody using your belt. This video will be ostensibly about paintball guns, but let's get to the point. For a deterrent factor, being in possession of something that looks just like a gun and makes a loud bang, even a blank gun, may have a deterrent effect. Using something completely silent, like a properly done paintball gun that can inflict damage up to 3 inches deep into someone's flesh, may not be a deterrent, but it might stop someone. But the reason handguns and shotguns and such are used is because you can make someone stop against their will, and that's the reason for them. Looking into any method I could find to not kill somebody, to stop them from attacking me, because that's happened more than 6 times in my lifespan, which is not really worth getting anything like this done with, no guns needed here. I've come to the conclusion that no matter what I pick as a solution, they're not. 2009, the Tiberius Arms company invented, or reinvented, the Foster slug as the first strike. This is a shaped paintball, and it's based on the Foster, lineman, or Brenneke slug, depending on how you look at it. It has aspects from all of them, especially the diameter for the lineman type that you can get a mold for. They renamed their company after the projectile in 2017. This is now being used by, and in some cases, I think, patent violated by TIPPMANN in the Typics, which normally just only does round ball, and pepperball, a company called pepperballs. Where's salt balls? So anyway, so let's look at some ballistics here for an example. 3-inch wound penetration, 6-inch group at 100 to 300 feet, 200 to 300 feet per second, 11 foot-pounds or 15 joules minimum, 100 grain or 6.2 gram glass marble wrapped in a rubberized coating. Yeah, instead of paint ball, it's a glass ball. It's breaker ball. The 16-inch max barrel length a lot of them use isn't some sort of middle finger to the ATF or anything like that, because these do not qualify under ATF rules. It's because that's the length needed. Any longer than that or shorter than that doesn't seem to work, depending on what you're doing and whether it's rifled or not, by lapco, nemesis, or hammerhead for the barrel, because of the 300 foot per second restriction that most of them carry in the way they're designed or optimized for. These things come in 43 caliber, 50 caliber, and 68 caliber. Damn near 70 or 71 caliber for various types of things you find in shotguns. So one of them is basically a shotgun round. One of them is the lower size round, like a 45 or 38. They use the same thing for the paintball guns. They just use the barrel and put it in a body that looks like whatever gun they want for making an imitation gun. And the 50 cal might exist strictly because that may be the max limit in the country or state you're in, because they may have a 50 cal limit like they do on guns, real ones. Comparing this 11 foot-pound item to the anywhere from 700 to 1100 to 1600 foot-pound needed for taking out deer is kind of silly, but we're going to do it. In the Netherlands, they want you to have a 2200 joule down to 980 joule requirement. A real shotgun with a slug at 150 feet or 50 yards or 50 meters can get a 3-inch group. 6-inch group if you're firing the paintballs, even the good ones. Pretty good. With the lead weighted balls, because they don't, you can make lighter objects go faster, but the lead slugs that they fire out of a shotgun drop 5 inches at 100 yards. So you see your group, you know the group will be down here. Now I'm going to read off a few select calibers versus objects. equivalents. The base of a 12 gauge shotgun shell is around 81 caliber, give or take. 80 caliber is called 9 gauge. 77.5 is 10 gauge. 11 gauge is 75 caliber. This is the, on paper, bore diameter at the muzzle for a flare gun in the United States, and maybe for the French ones. And, or, slug bore for a 12 gauge. The French flare guns can also be made out of metal and fire a very low power 12 gauge shotgun shell, shooting basically a rubber version of the paintball. They're basically breaker balls, but they're just rubber only. Same weight, most of the same characteristic. The Winchester, Brenneke, and lineman slugs all range from 68 caliber up to 73, 74 caliber. So you have to have shotguns that can tolerate those sorts of things. Paintballs are smack dab at 67.9 or 68 caliber, around thereabouts. And that's the same range as the 303 FN riot gun, the FN 303. Yeah, protesters. The wad-tailed slug, or wad slug with a tail on it, is 1 caliber larger, 69. 69 point something is 14 gauge, and 71 caliber is 13 gauge as far as the bore diameter. These go all over the place. 17 gauge is 65 caliber, and that's nearly the smallest diameter you get on a choke tube. Not really, but it's pretty close. Excuse me. Let's talk about cork. You can look up the densities for various materials, but rubber slugs fired out of paintball guns have a density that is a specific type, and it's in this range. It's around 3 cubic centimeters for the object if it's a round ball. Same thing with the breaker balls. These are 70 grains, or 4.3 grams, working out to be 1.5 gram per centimeter approximately, on average for just rubber. The Fun-Tir spherical rubber slugs. They also have the Brenneke slug, you get the idea. And rubber is near the density of coal. It's denser than high-density polyethylene milk jug plastic that's used for some of these, for your, self-defense slugs. Also less lethal ammo out of a paintball gun, and also out of shotguns. Cork is much, much lower, so is pine, so is wood. Aluminum is much higher, almost double the density of rubber, and is much easier to get. Then you get zinc, iron, tin, steel, brass, bronze, copper, and nickel, bismuth, lead, gold, and tungsten. Just saying. And the easiest one to get that's a simulation of this is cutting off just the end with a pipe cutter for a whippet slug, for a 71 caliber version of the same thing, which you could probably get away with using if you wanted to, depending on where you get it from. You can also look up mouse ball cores. They're normally 21 or 22 millimeters across, but it has a 70 caliber or larger steel core ball, if you can find a whole box of those. And they're roughly the equivalent of being the same kind of slug as far as density and mass and all that kind of stuff. What about barrel material? Well, let me see if I can find my text file. Copper pipe, outer diameter versus inner diameter, is based on its KLM, or other letter designation, and colors. M is thin-walled, not medium. L is medium, not large. And K is thick-walled. These have the ability, because there's 3 base types, to be a lot like Schedule 40, Schedule 80, Schedule 160 for steel pipe. But because copper pipe is used for a completely different purpose, the outer diameters don't match at all. Also, they use sleeves instead of screw thread things, normally that are soldered. So the sleeve material has diameters that can fit over each other. And you can buy the sleeve tubing to cut your own for different lengths if you find a supplier of the raw tubing that's used to make them. And you can make them mix and match and make telescoping tubes over each other just by looking up the data. And let's talk about bicycle tubing, if you ever had that idea. Remember, the copper tubing is useful for making all sorts of things, like steampunk items, and maybe even making air gun barrels, and for the copper fridge tube variety. Or you can use it for making, air gun tubes. But they usually use brass. A lot of them do, as a base material. And then you get the good ones made by somebody who knows what they're doing. But if you want to get into these things, you can. But seat posts pipes and handlebar pipes are the only ones you can get that start off being a hollow tube, and they may have chamber sizes at the end that look suspiciously like a 14 gauge or 12 gauge or whatever, or they might look necked up. And you can get them in all sorts of diameters, but the standards for them don't match anything of any use to most people for something commonly available for either paintball or for a weapon. But they do match, just like the copper tubing, for making cartridges or fake cartridges. So you can make your own CO2 fake, cool looking brass and copper shotgun shell insert or snap caps. That's what I found that's useful. Messing with a bicycle tubing, you could find pipe diameters and stuff and make a completely unique device to do the same thing. Even air tanks. And you can use them as components to build these things. That's why this is useful. See, it's not about making guns. It's not even about self-defense. It's about paintballs today. It's interesting. You can look up the diameters on the end of handlebars. Those are the grip ends. The middle point, which is the mount point or other name for it. The dimensions are all over the place. Suffice it to say, looking these up, you can find a long, deep rabbit hole to go into. Unless you want to make something ridiculously unconventional that doesn't match up with anything else, or just add layers to something, none of these are really useful except for the copper pipe and steel pipe, and the fact that you can interplay them. And you can also find copper pipe that's designed to match steel tubing, steel pipe. Just saying. Now, I've gone through, I think, everything I need to. These are a really short subject on its nature. But let's talk about actual weapons, dead last. And why we have exceptions for these things. I mean, you can make a 3-inch deep impact wound in somebody with an air gun, a paintball gun. And you can use a version of it that uses gunpowder to actually break ribs, and potentially buckshot's used, even if it's rubber buckshot, to puncture a lung. In France, anyway. What does this compare to a shotgun? Well, again, the grouping is smaller, there's more accuracy, that sort of thing. But why aren't these ruled? Well, they don't have a propellant mated to the projectile in a cartridge or some other form. As long as a gun was designed to fire shot, it can be repurposed to fire a single projectile by changing the ammunition. And since that's impossible to regulate and kind of silly, and is not the thing that's regulated, because ammunition is not supposed to be regulated. This also allows for modification by the user or the manufacturer with the additional of a choke, which became popular, and then a rifled choke, or any other damn thing, as a muzzle device. Also, just putting in a barrel that's rifled became okay. They sort of just weaseled it in. It's still not considered anything other than what it started off being. There's a whole video about that. In the Netherlands, to hunt, you need a much higher pressure and much more violence to the thing to be able to do anything. And these would be considered less than lethal or non-lethal. This is the reason they're not regulated. That and the fact that they don't actually have a propellant included with it. When you make a cartridge out of it, even just the primer and sticking a paintball into a shotgun shell and put it into something, it's a regulated item unless it starts off a full-length gun. And one last thing. The tent pole that came with that awning kit you got makes a dandy paintball gun. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that.